Let's talk about something that we've all been guilty of at some point in our lives: being too available. Always picking up the phone, always responding instantly, always saying yes. And while on the surface that may look like kindness, like dedication, or maybe just being dependable, underneath it carries a dangerous message, one that often goes unnoticed until it's too late. Here's the truth: constant availability diminishes your value. Now, I know that can sound harsh, even a bit transactional, but stay with me. This isn't about treating relationships like business deals. It's about understanding the basic psychology of human behavior and the subtle ways people interpret your boundaries, or your lack of them. We live in a time when attention is currency, time is precious, energy is finite, and when you're always available, what you're silently communicating is that your time doesn't carry weight, that your energy is cheap, that your presence is easy to obtain. And here's what happens next: people stop appreciating it. Psychologically, it taps into something simple but powerful. What's easily accessible loses its significance. It's not that people are inherently ungrateful or manipulative. It's just how our brains are wired. Think about it: the friend who's always there, always saying yes, always bending, they become the background noise. Reliable, but invisible. Respected for their consistency, perhaps, but not admired for their strength. And before you know it, you're being taken for granted, not out of malice, but out of human nature. The more someone is exposed to something on demand, the more they normalize it. What was once generous starts to feel expected. What was once thoughtful begins to seem obligatory. Availability, when given in excess, removes the element of choice. People stop seeing your presence as something you're choosing to give, and instead start assuming it's just what you do. And here's the kicker: when you're always there, people stop asking themselves if they even deserve your attention. They just assume it's owed to them. There's a philosophical weight to this. Think about what it means to be in control of your time, your energy, your attention. It means you recognize your own value, that you understand not everyone should have access to you, not all the time, that your presence should be something people notice when it arrives and feel when it's gone. This isn't about playing games or withdrawing as a form of manipulation. It's about intentional living. It's about choosing when to give and when to hold back, not out of spite, but out of wisdom. You are not infinite. Your ability to listen, to support, to give, those are limited resources. And when you act like they're unlimited, you end up depleted. And worse, you end up unappreciated. I see this especially in people who lead with empathy, the ones who want to be there for everyone, who feel guilty setting boundaries. But listen, kindness without boundaries is not kindness. It's self-abandonment. You think you're being generous, but what you're actually doing is training others to expect more than they deserve, more than you can reasonably give, and more than you're ever thanked for. There's a discipline in saying, "I can't talk right now," in choosing not to respond immediately, in prioritizing your own needs without apology. And that discipline communicates something powerful: I respect myself, I value my time, and I expect others to do the same. And here's the beauty of that shift. When you stop being overly available, you force others to step into awareness. They start paying attention. They notice when you do show up. They start to wonder, what does their time really cost? What does their attention mean? You elevate your presence simply by not giving it away so freely. This doesn't mean becoming cold or distant. It means becoming intentional. Think about the people you admire, the ones whose attention feels like a privilege, the ones who, when they walk into a room, command it. That kind of presence isn't built through overexposure. It's built through discernment, through restraint, through clarity on what matters most. There's also a deeper identity piece to this. When you're always available to everyone else, you slowly lose access to yourself. You stretch so thin that you don't even recognize your own needs anymore. And the scary part is, you start basing your worth on how useful you are to others. If you're not helping, if you're not solving, if you're not showing up, you feel less valuable. That's a dangerous pattern. Because your value is not determined by your accessibility. It's defined by your essence, your mindset, your integrity, your focus, your standards. The more you preserve those things, the more powerful your presence becomes. You walk differently when you know your worth. You speak with more clarity. You move with more confidence. You stop chasing and start choosing. You weren't born to be available to everyone. You were born to be intentional with your energy, your gifts, your space. Some people will only recognize your worth when they no longer have unrestricted access to it. That's not cruel, it's clarity. So, the next time you feel the impulse to reply immediately, to stretch yourself one more time, to be everywhere for everyone, pause. Ask yourself, am I offering this from strength or from fear, from clarity or from guilt? Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to simply be unavailable. Let your absence speak volumes. Let your boundaries redefine your value. And remember, when you stop being constantly available, you start becoming deeply respected. There's something deeply powerful about mystery, about not being fully seen, fully available, fully known at all times. And yet, in this age of constant connectivity, we're losing that power. We overshare, we overexpose, we make ourselves emotionally and mentally accessible 24/7. And in doing so, we lose a very important psychological advantage, the strength that comes from restraint. Let's be real. When you're too available, you kill the very thing that makes you magnetic, mystery. You eliminate the tension, the intrigue, the sense of curiosity people feel when they don't know everything about you, when they can't reach you at any time, when your time and attention feel like a gift instead of a guarantee. Think about the most respected people you know, not just the ones who are liked, but the ones who command a room, who draw people in. Chances are, they're not always in reach. They don't constantly explain themselves. They don't need to show up everywhere to be felt. That's not an accident. That's intentional. There's a kind of emotional scarcity that builds value. Just like in economics, when something is rare, it's treasured. When something is common, it's taken for granted. Your energy works the same way. If you make yourself available to everyone at all times, people stop seeing your presence as something meaningful. It becomes background noise, white noise, a presence without impact. The mind is wired to desire what it can't easily have. This isn't manipulation, it's just psychology. When you're slightly out of reach, people lean in. They pay attention. They wonder what you're doing, how you think, why you move the way you do. And that wondering creates presence even in your absence. It makes your eventual appearance more impactful. That's the power of mystery. It lets silence speak louder than words ever could. Now, some people hear that and immediately think of games. They think withholding your attention means you're trying to manipulate others, play hard to get, make people chase you. But that's not what I'm talking about. This isn't about performance. It's about principle. It's about reclaiming your energy, your privacy, and your peace, and realizing that those things don't have to be constantly broadcast in order to be real. Look at how we behave online. We feel the pressure to post every thought, every win, every moment. We constantly explain ourselves, justify our absence, seek validation through overexposure. And yet, the most influential people, the ones with real authority and presence, they don't do that. They let their results speak. They move with intention, not explanation. They allow mystery to do the talking. That's because mystery, when grounded in authenticity, creates respect. People start to value your words more when you don't offer them all the time. They listen more carefully when you speak less often. They notice your actions more when they don't always know what you're doing. And most importantly, they start to respect your boundaries when you stop offering unlimited access to your time, your thoughts, and your emotional labor. Now let's take it a layer deeper. At the philosophical level, too much availability is often rooted in fear, a fear of being forgotten, a fear of being misunderstood, a fear of being left out. So we overcompensate, we make ourselves overly visible, overly accommodating, overly on, because we think if we're not, we'll disappear. But here's the paradox. The more you show up without intention, the less you're noticed. The more you give without discernment, the less you're valued. Being selective with your presence doesn't mean being selfish. It means being strategic. It means recognizing that mystery is not about hiding who you are. It's about reserving your energy for the moments and people who matter. It's about having enough self-respect to say, not everyone gets access to me. Not every situation deserves my full emotional engagement. And let's not confuse silence with weakness. It takes more strength to hold back than to react. It takes more power to sit with yourself than to constantly seek affirmation. The person who can walk away, who can stay silent, who doesn't need to prove themselves every moment, that's the person who owns the room when they enter it. You see, mystery doesn't isolate you. It elevates you. It allows people to meet you at a higher level on your terms. It forces them to slow down and be more present when you speak. It teaches them not to assume your attention is easy to win. And when you move like that, when your availability is thoughtful, not automatic, you stop blending in and start standing out. One of the most misunderstood forms of power is stillness. When you're not reacting, not chasing, not filling the silence, just existing with confidence. That's what mystery gives you, the space to be still and still be seen. Not through noise, but through presence. That's real influence. That's real value. So ask yourself, are you showing up because it serves you or because you're afraid not to? Are you being present because it aligns with your purpose or because you feel obligated to be seen? Because the difference matters. One gives you power. The other drains it. When you begin to pull back, not out of ego, but out of clarity, you begin to reset the narrative. You start communicating not with words, but with presence. You let your silence speak volumes. You stop performing and start leading. And in that quiet confidence, people begin to notice you, not because you forced them to, but because they had to. Let's talk about something we don't always admit. What happens to us internally when we make ourselves too available? Because the damage doesn't just show up in how people treat us. It shows up in how we start to feel about ourselves. When you're constantly available to others, emotionally, mentally, physically, you begin to experience a slow, quiet erosion of your own energy. And that erosion often begins long before you notice it. Being too available drains you in ways that are subtle at first, but deeply costly over time. You might think you're just being supportive, generous, dependable. But underneath that, what you're often doing is overextending. You're stretching your emotional bandwidth so thin that you don't even realize how disconnected you're becoming from your own needs, your own peace, your own internal alignment. And it happens because psychologically, many of us have been conditioned to equate availability with value. We think if we're not there for everyone all the time, we're somehow failing as a partner, a friend, a leader, a parent, a human being. So we run ourselves into the ground, showing up to every request, replying to every message, solving problems that aren't even ours, until we wake up one day exhausted, burnout, and resentful. That's the emotional cost of being too available resentment. And it doesn't show up all at once. It sneaks in. It starts with little things, feeling slightly annoyed at the constant texts, dreading the phone calls, feeling heavy around certain people. But instead of addressing it, we push through. We say, it's just a bad day. But it's not just a bad day. It's a signal. A sign that you've been giving too much of yourself without pause, without permission, and without preservation. Philosophically, this raises a deeper question. What is your responsibility to yourself? Because if you're always available to others, but never available to yourself, your thoughts, your rest, your emotional processing, then you're living externally, not internally. You're existing in reaction, not intention. And the danger of that is you lose touch with what you actually need because you're too focused on what everyone else wants. You start building your identity around being needed instead of being whole. And that's a fragile place to live from, because if your self-worth is built on being constantly accessible, then the moment you take a step back, You feel guilt. You feel selfish. You feel like you're letting people down. But let me offer this perspective. Your peace is not selfish. Your space is not selfish. Your time is not selfish. In fact, those are the foundations that allow you to give from a place of clarity rather than depletion. What happens when you're always on is that you start performing life instead of living it. You're no longer responding to life with intention. You're just reacting to whoever is loudest in the room, whoever needs you most urgently, whoever sends the next message. And when you live in that reactive mode, your nervous system never shuts off. You're constantly in a low-grade state of tension, always bracing for the next demand. That's where anxiety starts to build. Fatigue creeps in. You feel overwhelmed not just by responsibilities, but by the very idea of being needed. You fantasize about disappearing, not because you don't care, but because you're exhausted from caring without limits. And the cruel part, most people don't even realize how much they're draining you because you've trained them to believe you'll always be there. You've taught them that your silence doesn't mean, I need space. It means, try harder, ask again. I'll answer eventually. It takes courage to untrain people, to reset expectations, to pull back and say, I can't be everything to everyone anymore. It takes strength to build boundaries not out of anger, but out of self-respect. Because when you finally stop being available, something powerful happens. You start hearing yourself again. You hear the thoughts that got buried under obligation. You feel the emotions you've been too distracted to process. And you remember who you are outside of what people expect from you. That's the turning point, when your availability becomes a choice, not a reflex. And when that shift happens, people start adjusting. Not all of them will like it. Some will resist it. But the ones who truly value you, not your constant access, will understand. They'll adapt. They'll begin to honor the space you need to maintain your own emotional stability. And over time, the quality of your relationships will improve, not because you're more available, but because you're showing up from a place of truth, not exhaustion. This isn't about cutting people off or becoming distant. It's about alignment. It's about making sure your outward engagement matches your inward state. If you're drained, don't force connection. If you're overwhelmed, don't fake availability. Be honest with yourself first and then with others. You can't be a healthy presence in anyone's life if you're a ghost in your own. So the next time you feel that inner tug to respond right away, to jump in and fix, to make yourself available even when your body is screaming no, pause, breathe. Ask yourself, is this mine to carry? Or am I just afraid of what happens if I say no? Because sometimes the most loving word you can speak is no. And sometimes the most powerful presence you can offer is absence, not as punishment, but as preservation. Let yourself rest. Let yourself be missed. Let yourself exist without always being in service. And watch how your energy shifts from survival to sovereignty. Time is not just something you spend, it's something you invest. And yet so many people treat their time like it's infinite, like it has no weight, no cost. They give it away freely, thoughtlessly. And what ends up happening is that they become exhausted, underappreciated, and unsure why they feel so drained. The truth is your time is an asset, not a giveaway. We live in a world that romanticizes business. We glorify constant access, instant replies, the idea that being everywhere for everyone is noble. But let's call it what it really is, unsustainable. When you treat your time as disposable, other people will too. If you're constantly saying yes, constantly making yourself available, you end up running your life on everyone else's schedule. And slowly, you lose your grip on your own. Think about this. We put passwords on our phones, we lock our homes, we insure our valuables, yet we leave our time wide open for anyone to take. Why? Because we don't always see time as a possession, but it is. In fact, it's your most precious possession. You can make more money, you can rebuild a reputation, but you cannot manufacture more time. Once it's spent, it's gone permanently. So what does it mean to treat your time like an asset? It means you get clear on what matters most. It means you become discerning about where your energy goes and who gets access to it. It means understanding that not every invitation deserves a yes, not every message requires a reply, and not every situation needs your involvement. That's not rudeness. That's strategy. That's living on purpose. There's a deep psychological shift that happens when you begin to respect your own time. You stop filling your calendar just to avoid discomfort. You stop overcommitting out of guilt or fear of being disliked. You stop showing up to things just because you should. And that internal shift creates an external ripple. People begin to notice that you move differently. You're not as easily swayed. You're not available on demand. You have boundaries, and those boundaries force people to rise to a higher standard if they want access to you. When you recognize your time as valuable, you begin to show up in the world with more authority. Because people who value their own time command more respect. They make decisions from clarity, not pressure. They protect their peace instead of chasing validation. They lead themselves before trying to lead anyone else. But let's take it even deeper. When you don't value your time, you often start using it as a way to prove your worth. You overextend, you overgive, you say yes just to feel needed. You fill your days with activity that looks productive but leaves you feeling empty. That's not time management. That's time avoidance. It's using business to cover up a lack of direction. Philosophically, this goes back to the idea of agency, your ability to direct your own life. When you give your time away without intention, you're surrendering your agency. You're saying, here, you decide what I focus on, you decide what matters, I'll just react. And over time, that erodes your identity. You stop living by design and start living by default. That's not how leaders live. Leaders protect their time not just to be efficient, but to stay aligned. They understand that clarity requires space, that focus is a resource, not a reaction, and that if you're always giving your time away to everyone else, you never have any left to build the life you actually want. One of the hardest truths to accept is this: not everyone deserves your time. Not every conversation deserves your energy. Not every crisis is your responsibility. And until you start living by that truth, you'll stay stuck in the cycle of over-availability, resenting people for crossing boundaries that you never set. Let me be clear. You can be kind, generous, and compassionate, and still guard your time with intensity. In fact, true